Aria, good to see you.
You too.
And Coco, great to see you.
Good to see you as well.
You both performed at CPAMO's gathering on November 29th at Small World Music and Intergalactic Studios. And wow, amazing performances. As you recall, our event was about community engaged, socially engaged art, and your pieces fit so magnificently into it. Can you tell me about, why you chose that particular work? So for you in the evening, what was that about, and why then? Why that piece?
So I shared a piece called Link that was a solo that I made on myself starting in 2016. And there were a few reasons why I chose that work specifically. I think the conversations around community engaged work are really interesting when we think about who is our community. And this piece specifically, I brought together people from my personal community to make the work with me. So it was created with and by other artists around this question of what is my generation fighting for and what is my generation fighting against. And in that conversation, the social and political subject matter started to peek through. I think when I was starting to imagine the work 2 years ago, this idea of what are we fighting for, our world was very different. Trump hadn't been voted into power and Standing Rock hadn't even happened yet. And I was thinking about the generations that came before me, and I felt like my generation didn't necessarily have a fight that was something across the board that everyone could get behind. And as the piece evolved and I brought my peers into the creative process, these sparks started to show themselves and the themes emerged. I think for me this piece is about finding your voice. I always make socially and politically engaged work. For me, when I'm thinking about making a work, I look at subject matter that interests me and inspires me and engages me, and that often has a political undertone just because of the kind of person that I am and the background that I have. So there was choosing this piece, I feel like it had threads that aligned to the conversations that CPAMO wanted to have, and also brought a unique perspective to engage people in different ways. I started off the piece differently than how it was presented in the past to highlight the idea of what is community engaged arts, and I invited the audience to intertwine their ideas into it as like an offering to sink into it from the beginning.
Okay, thank you. And that was a solo piece, but you had a collective.
Yes.
And your collective started off with an incredible land acknowledgement that I thought was wonderful for both recognizing our place here on Indigenous territory, but also the connection to our ancestors from Africa. Can you talk about why that piece and the group that you brought together around it?
Yes. So given that I'm an artist director of this arts collective, so my collaborators, this is a sample of some of the programming that we do. So because it's intersections between socially engaged practices that we use in our art form, the piece is basically about how do we, in terms of African and Caribbean descendants, how do we tell our story? That was the theme I was going with. So, of course, we acknowledge the land, acknowledge the ancestors, acknowledge the transatlantic, journey. But it was also showing the intersections between, I have an elder, I work with my elders in the community, and getting the blessing from my elder. And that was my engagement between me and one of the elders who was singing and right. So then when I started to perform, I was actually doing a Manding specific ethnic dance called Lamba, which is from either Guinea or Mali. So this dance is usually done for the griot, the jelly. Didn't have time to sing the song because there was so much threads happening at the same time because we're showing all these intersections. So that dance is done for the griot, the storyteller, the oral historian, the repository of information. So showed that piece, went into the relationship between, movement, rhythm, and movement, which is traditional West African movement. And then we went across the seas to show my ancestry, which is Guyanese. So my collaborator is also Guyanese. So he was singing a folk song. So we're showing our threads of the diaspora from continent to where our ancestors are from. And we went to, of course, orality, singing the song, and the call and response relationship, trying to get the audience engaged. And then at the same time, we were also using indigenous instruments. So there was a point where we had bamboo, and I also had my scratch. So we're using instruments from, Trinidad and the Caribbean, which was emerged when the drum was banned. And we had to still continue to tell our stories, and, performance in terms of resistance. So singing that song with that in the background, making that connection, that intersection, and trying to get the audience engaged, which they were. So when I do my community arts programming, like in the background we had visual artists that their work was being presented, because in our arts practice we do have visual arts, we have percussion, we have rhythm with the dance, and sometimes our themes are interwoven, integrated. They're not always separate because these art forms are presented congruently. And so it's basically, how do we tell our stories in multiple ways, in multiple art forms. And the artwork from the visual artists were showing, their respect to the continent and their relationship to the Caribbean, which is their backgrounds as well. And some of the final work was some of our community arts engaged work with one of the projects that we did, which was anti-oppression and equity in the arts. So we were showing this particular school, the students who were doing some anti-oppression training, how to use the arts and how did our ancestors use that as an expression when they faced oppression. So that art form was, so the visual artist was showing the different images that she was working with the kids on in that PowerPoint as well. So we showed basically all the intersections of how we present our community arts programming.
Wonderful, wonderful. Both of you talked about the importance of resistance, of looking at the times and having a voice against oppression, and also engaging people in change work and so on, and from your own perspectives. Can you talk a bit about sort of aesthetic vision that you have that's brought you to that point of view in terms of your work? And how does it work? So you were doing a solo, but you said you work with others, and your work, you came in with a group. I mean, how does that work when you're working with other people? How do you bring them into that orbit, so to speak?
Okay. I would probably say I would have a vision in terms of what kind of program I want to present. And it could be for a variety of reasons, because we're trying to bring different art forms that are not accessible and make them accessible into the communities that we engage in. So most of us go abroad and we learn these art forms elsewhere, internationally. And we have generations of Canadians as well as immigrants who are not accessible. They don't have access to this knowledge. So when we make our programming, it's about, okay, so it's this particular population and what do they need? What would they like? What are they asking for? And how do we bring those cultural arts practices along with the history and the knowledge and the engagement into those spaces?
Excellent. Excellent. And I've seen your work a few times, and everything always sort of has that edge to it, which is quite magnificent. So how do you generate that and connect with others around it?
I mean, for me, my art is about representation. I think the reason I started making work was because I didn't feel like I had a place, or I didn't feel like I had a space in what I was going to see. So one of my mandates is to create spaces for people that have felt othered, to have a voice and to share voices and to share subject matter. So this work specifically, even though it was a solo, I wanted to bring people into it that could add their perspective and their interpretation into the subject matter that I was exploring. I think we're stronger together. And yeah, I wanted not just my own identity. Like, I have a mixed background, and I didn't want to have to represent one person's voice. I wanted to represent many people's voices. That's something in my research when I'm doing anything that's really important to me. So yeah, bringing in other collaborators was about the conversation and how we can expand the conversation from the studio into the engagement with an audience and beyond. I think that's the power of the arts, is starting conversations. So conversations should be a part of the creation.
It's interesting because there's so many different ways in which artists create these days. And how would you situate your work within this quote-unquote contemporary milieu? And I'm using that word contemporary because we all know how guarded and loaded that term is. And yet, obviously, your work is contemporary. It's being made now. It's socially relevant. It relates to issues of the day. So where do you see, let me start with you, Ari, where do you see your work fitting within that milieu?
I mean, the one word that comes to mind is collaborative. I think that at its core, collaboration is what can make the world a better place. And for me, the way that my work looks is because of the people that I've chosen to work with, whether that's other professional artists or community members. We decide together what we create. So it's hard to say like what the aesthetic of my work is, because the aesthetic of my work is collaboration, and the people that I collaborate with inspire me and inspire how a work comes out. There is something really interesting though about working with people over time, where they start to understand the kinds of choices that interest you, and you can start to develop an aesthetic that's more definable. As an emerging artist, I think I'm just discovering what that might be.
Right.
But yeah, the melding of, I don't know, I'm really interested in people's expressions. And
So you really want to get into the exploration as
yeah,
people
I'm
come together.
process driven.
Yeah. Okay.
I think.
So no, you're not going in with an outcome in mind.
I mean, I would say that my work is dance theater. I tell stories, whether they're narrative or abstract, and my work is contemporary. I think I'm creating, contemporary means now, and I am drawing on things that have been born from my own experiences and the experiences of the people that I'm working with. But I mean, we talk about this idea, I get asked a lot, like, what does it feel like to be like a contemporary Indigenous artist? And I think for me, I want my work to just stand on its own. I don't think we need to attach cultural heritage to work. I think that actually limits us as communities and as people engaging with the world. I think art should just be art, and it is contemporary because we're making it today.
Coco, yourself, I mean, this is again, you talked about the relationship to ancestors and your own practice studying abroad, coming back here, and I imagine there's a lot of birthing, if you want to call it that, with people saying, oh, wow, that's of African descent, and so on. How does this fit?
I would say the work that I feel that I'm starting to create or have been creating is to show the diversity within diaspora. Because we also have these monolithic stereotypes that we work through where people think, black art looks one way. So it does not. There's so much diversity across the entire continent, worldwide, even from the Caribbean, even from South America, where my family's from. And it's about showing all those different threads and those intersections, there's a lot of fusions that are happening in the contemporary, but sometimes people are not aware of where the foundations are coming from. So I think my work is speaking to, let's show foundation, let's show evolution, let's show where it is now. And also the whole idea of working with intergenerational groups of people, because in the past I've always worked with my peers.
Right.
But I'm moving in a direction where I'm working with my elders, I'm working with my peers, I'm even working with artists younger than me.
Right.
Sometimes I may be the oldest artist on a project, but that doesn't even matter, because we're all working towards the same goal of showing the diversity within the art forms across the Caribbean and Africa as well.
So what's next for Coco Marian Collective? What are you doing in 2019 and beyond?
What am I doing?
No
Okay,
pressure.
well, no pressure. I know. Well, for me, I'm going to be finishing my master's graduate research. Basically working towards just exploring the question of the experiences and the successes and the challenges of the cultural artist as they engage in their art forms teaching in schools. Working through that project, I'm getting into a lot more mentorship now. A lot of people are approaching me to mentor them because they see what I'm doing in multiple art forms, in multiple ways, how I'm using dance in many ways, either as writing and research and performance and community arts. Right now I'm starting a dance mentorship program. I'm about to launch that soon. Trying to show youth, Black mentees, if you want a career in cultural arts, what are the pathways? What is there to think about?
Wonderful.
So there's that, and there's other projects that could be coming down the pike.
Excellent.
Yes, but I'll be going abroad later this month to go train with my master teachers, so that's next.
Someplace warm, I'm sure.
Yes. Yes.
Aria, you had a lot go on last year for you, and where are you going next? And
Yeah, I've had a little bit of time to settle into a new work that I'm developing. It's my first full-length piece. It's called In the Abyss, and it gets presented at the end of October in 2019.
Wow.
So it will have a year and a half to go from concept to realization, and I'm really excited about it. It's the first time that I've been able to look at the idea of hope in my work. I always try to bring hope into a piece, but I feel like I've never gotten there. And with this piece, I'm looking forward, and I'm looking at like where's the softness and where's the joy inside of my work, which is often like political and harsh and has a lot of pain inside of it. So yeah, In the Abyss is a group piece that really it's looking at what we all have in common with one another. It's based on the idea that we're all made of stardust, and yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to develop something over a long period of time. It feels good to not have to rush into production.
Well, I know that at CPAMO we were really happy that you both submitted proposals. The jury it was easy. It made it easy, which is wonderful, because what you've just talked about was hit right on the head what we were looking for. And you can tell from the reception of the audience that was there that they really loved it. So that was magnificent. So really, thank you both for putting your proposals in, for the performances that you gave, and we look forward to connecting again as we go forward into the future. Either watching you in your own work or having you back with CPAMO again. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.